Hello students, today I am going to explain you Michael Madhusudan Dutt's poem uh, King Porus, a legend of old. First, I will tell you about Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Michael Madhusudan Dutt was born in 1824 in a very sophisticated Hindu family in Calcutta. Uh, as a child, he was a precocious person and his early exposure to English education and in European literature at home and at college cultivated in him a love of English, and he imitated English in his taste and manner. Uh, he had literary talents, and he wrote some poems which was not appreciated um, in India. So he thought that uh, the English people will appreciate his poems. So he went to Europe, and there he published his English poems and plays. But he also got frustration there because in England people thought that he was not a native writer of England. So he came back to India in Calcutta, and here he wrote a poem in Bangla language, which became very famous and which made him reputed. And he realized that his real talent lies in Bangla language. So he wrote many poems and plays in Bangla language and then translated them into English. Michael Madhusudan Dutt was an advocate, uh, journalist, editor, and a poet. He married an European lady, and he wrote many poems, and his works are. He wrote a verse romance, "The Captive Lady," which is written in Byronic style, as Michael Madhusudan Dutt was inspired by romantic poets like uh, Lord Byron and Sir Walter Scott. So this poem has, which is a verse romance, has Byronic style, uh, and he wrote visions of the past in blank verse, and he translated Ratnavali um, and he wrote an epic in Bengali language, which was called Meghnadwad, which was translated into English after his death. Michael Madhusudan Dutt died in 1873, but he inspired many poets. He inspired the successive generation of poets um, due to his talents. Michael Madhusudan Sudan Dutt's poem King Porus is based on a legend of India. It's based on the facts of history. King Porus, King Alexander, who had invaded India, and he crossed Indus River and reached the river Jhelum, where the estates of the kings of the estates of nearby area surrendered themselves to Alexander, and there was also a king, the king of Umbi, who was an opponent of King Porus, and the king of Umbi um, welcomed and helped uh, Alexander with many, by giving him many soldiers, because he wanted to take revenge with King Porus. Alexander crossed the river Indus, and he advanced towards the river Jhelum. the kingdom of uh, King Porus lie between the rivers of Jhelum and Chenab. When Alexander started uh, uh, towards the kingdom of King Porus, there was a stormy night. The strong winds were blowing, and there were thunder and lightning in the sky. In such an situation, he crossed the river silently and reached to the kingdom of King Porus in the morning. The King Porus had already collected his forces on the other side of River Jhelum, and there rose a fierce battle between these two forces, the forces of Alexander and the forces of King Porus. There were 11,000 soldiers in the army of Alexander. On the first day of battle, King Porus lost his son and 4,000 soldiers, but he fought very bravely um, because he he did not want to surrender himself uh, to before Alexander. He wanted to save the liberty of his kingdom till his last breath. He fought very bravely, and Alexander, in this battle, there were nine wounds on the body of King Porus, but he did not stop and kept on fighting with the enemy forces. He was like he was fighting fiercely, and when Alexander saw the bravery of King Porus, and he saw the wounds on the body of King Porus, he said to his soldiers to stop the war, um, because the bravery of King Porus and his soldiers had dismayed Alexander. He did not want to advance or go forward in India. So he sent his messenger and called them to bring King Porus before him. When King Porus was brought to him in chains, uh, he although he was defeated, but he was proud and self-esteemed, and he was appearing like a lion in chains. Alexander asked him how he should be treated, and King Porus replied to him that uh, as I call in the words of the poet, even as a king. It means he said to him that he should be treated uh, as a king should treat another king. So when Alexander heard these words, he became very surprised, and he became very impressed by the bravery and self-esteem and pride of uh, King Porus. Uh, so he told him to stop the war and make peace, and thus he returned back. But before going away, he made the king of Ambi and King Porus friends again. So this poem is a narrative poem uh, which tells uh, which tells us about the character of Alexander and King Porus. King Porus was a very brave person who fought for the freedom of his country or his motherland. And Alexander was also a generous monarch, although uh, he was enemy of King Porus. Still, when he saw his bravery, he appreciated him and restored his kingdom back to him. So he was a generous monarch, and um, in this poem, there are so many similes which are used successively. In the poem, King Porus is compared to Himalayan peak, uh, the peak of Himalaya which remains eternally uh, snow covered. And in, King Porus stood among his enemies like a Himalayan peak, and he is also compared to strong wind which blows over the mountains uh, and uh, and destroys lowers and destroys all the trees of pines or reeds. In the same way, King Porus also um, made a devastation in the army or forces of enemy. He is also compared to a loin chained a loin in chains. When he was brought before Alexander, he was defeated, but still he had uh, self-esteem and pride like a lion, and he was very brave, and he did not want to surrender before him. In this poem, there are so many personifications. The death, passions, um, and liberty are personified. Uh, liber- liberty. The poet says that the liberty which used to rule in this India, um, where is it now? And liberty who used to rise in the sky to touch the clouds, sitting on her high throne. So liberty is personified as a goddess or queen, um, and the enemy forces, the forces of Alexander enters the kingdom of uh, King Porus, um, silently and swiftly, like a tiger, which comes to uh, um, kill any person deceptively. In the same way, the forces of enemies entered deceptively, and it also appeared like the step, like death, which appears slowly, and so the enemy forces of Alexander are compared with death, which comes with slow steps and silently. Uh, so this poem is based on a historical facts, uh, and it is there are used many personifications, similes, and characterization which gives light on the characters of the Macedonian king Alexander, and uh, and the king of Porus, who was very brave and fought for the freedom of India. In the last stanza of the poem, uh, we find a difference between the whole of the poem and in this last stanza, where the poet appeals and says, where are those kind of kings like who used to rule in India, the kings like King Porus, uh, who uh, who used to sacrifice their lives for who were ready to sacrifice their lives for the freedom of country. But now the kings have lowered their heads, and the 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 and they have no self-esteem. They have surrendered themselves to the foreign to the rulers of foreign countries, and India has been robbed of its uh, previous culture, previous glories, and previous wealth. um, uh, the country appears to him like a tree which is devoid of leaves, flowers, and fruits. So, Michael Madhusudan Dutt is a Anglo-Indian poet, and he wrote poems on the history and mythology of India, and he wrote poems in Bangla language and then translated in English. Thank you.